this grace that was to be ours, it is our everything. And as we think together about grace, it's my hope and it's my prayer that it is something that you know personally, something that you are experiencing today, something that you are living in the good of even now.
Welcome to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths. I'm Steve Hiller. Glad you're with us as we continue our series, Faith Under Fire. And Jonathan, there may be somebody listening today who's saying, I'm not quite sure what you're talking about, Jonathan. This grace that you're referencing, our everything? What do you mean by that?
Well, the conviction of Peter, who wrote this letter that we're studying together at the present time, his conviction is that grace arrived in the person of Jesus Christ. God's grace to an undeserving people, God's grace to humanity, to all who would believe. And his great conviction is that history was building up to the arrival of Jesus Christ. History, as it were, was waiting for Jesus to come. And for those of us who live now on the other side of the arrival of Jesus and who have heard his message and received his salvation, we are incredibly privileged people because grace has come to us. And Peter's wanting to bring that assurance and that a reminder to a people who are living in a challenging time, in a difficult social context, Christians who are facing pressure and even persecution. He's wanting to say, look, things may be difficult, but you are incredibly privileged people. And I think that's a message that you and I need to hear today.
Well, it certainly is. So let's hear that together. From the book of 1 Peter, chapter 1, we're looking at verses 10 to 12 as we begin our message. An incredible privilege. Here is Jonathan.
I don't know what you think, but I tend to think that it is all too easy for us to view ourselves today as a kind of forgotten generation of Christian believers. A generation that kind of drew the short straw, that lost out on the good times, that ended up with a little bit of a bad deal. You know, overall, the church looks like it is in some degree of decline in the West. Opposition, as we know, is on the rise. Believers feel pushed to the margins, sometimes excluded, often disliked. We've seen that the call for tolerance of all things in recent years has quickly morphed into an intolerance of biblical teaching and of Christian people. And amidst these changes, we find ourselves musing that the old days were surely better, that we were born in the wrong era, that we missed the good days and we lack the privileges that former generations of Christians enjoyed. And quickly, as we reflect upon these things, feelings of self-pity quickly creep in. The believers to whom Peter was writing might have felt something similar. Scattered throughout ancient Asia Minor as they were, living among unbelieving and unsympathetic peoples, they were facing increasing pressure, opposition, persecution. And the unwelcome experience of these things might have caused them to wonder, have we been forgotten? Have we been abandoned? Are we the generation overlooked by the Lord, unseen by his eye, unguarded by his hand? With such feelings and such experiences in mind, no doubt, Peter brings to that earlier generation of marginalized believers, and he brings to us today, he brings the message of deep encouragement that we find in these present verses. He brings us the message that far from being the forgotten or the overlooked generation, the generation who have got the rough deal, who have missed out on something better, we are in fact an age and a generation marked by profound honor, by incredible privilege. Our great privilege as Christian people today centers on the access that we have at this point in salvation history to the message of Jesus Christ, to the gospel of his salvation. Now, as Peter lays out this privilege for our encouragement, he points us both to the substance of the message and to the announcement of that message. And we're going to consider both of those in turn. We start with the first one, the substance of the message. Verse 10, just notice it again with me. Concerning this salvation of which he has spoken, the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ was indicating when he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the subsequent glories. Now, in the previous verses here in chapter 1, Peter has tackled the hard issue of trials and suffering, as you may remember. And as he has dealt with that very hard theme, he has pointed our eyes to the goal of faith, to the outcome of faith, to the salvation of our souls. Just as in a long and arduous journey, we need to keep the destination in mind. When it comes to the trials of life and the challenges of faith, the only way to keep going is to look at the outcome and the destination. But now for our encouragement, he turns to consider the message that we have received, the gospel, the good news. He reminds us that this good news is something that was long promised, long anticipated. Concerning this salvation, the prophets of old prophesied about the grace that was to be yours, he says. This salvation, declared by the prophets of old, it was a message all about grace, and it was for us. I just want to stop for a few moments on that momentous word, grace. I want to linger there together and reflect carefully on it. What is grace? What do we understand by the word? What does it mean? Well, it refers, of course, to something that is freely given, something given without any deserving on the part of the recipient, something given not on the basis of merit. And, of course, the something in view here, the thing given, it is salvation itself. Our salvation is something profoundly of grace. Grace that was to be ours. Grace that has been given to us and revealed to us. It is something we could never earn, never deserve. It is nothing we could merit on our own. It is simply grace. And notice that Peter is telling us that this grace was something that was stored up for us, kept for us, ready to be given to us in our age, in our era. It is the grace, verse 10, that was to be yours. Now, as we hear Peter say that this grace was stored up for us and kept for us, kept aside for us in some respect, we might want to ask, what about the people of Israel? What about God's chosen nation? What about them and the generations that came before? Did they not have grace? Were they not recipients of grace? Was this grace not theirs too? I don't know if you've ever considered that question before. It's an interesting and an important one, I think. We need to give consideration to that question in the wider context of biblical teaching on this theme, of course. My mind moves naturally to the opening verses of John's gospel, where John just delights in the fact, you may remember, that Jesus brings us grace in a way that we had not known before. John chapter 1 and verse 14, and the Word, that is Jesus, this is familiar, he became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law, says John, was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. The law, it came through Moses. Grace and truth through Jesus. There is a real sense in which the era of the Old Testament was the era of law, and ours is the era of grace. The coming of Jesus meant the giving of grace, the outpouring of grace, and we are immensely, wonderfully privileged to live in this era. Now, it's very important for us to know in the midst of this conversation that no one was ever saved from sin by law keeping. No one is going to be in heaven because they kept the law of God especially well. It wasn't the case that people used to earn their salvation, but now we receive it as a gift. That's not the point. That's not what's being said here. God's dealings with his people have always been ultimately on the basis of grace. He has always been the God of kindness, of generosity, of mercy, and of hope. But he did require his Old Testament people to live within this framework of law that involved rite and ritual and dietary regulation and so much more. And these laws, among other things, they serve to show the people in practical terms and in vivid ways how very high are the standards of the holiness of God, how perfect is his perfection, and how much they, as his flawed people, needed grace and needed mercy, how much they needed a salvation that only he could give. And for his Old Testament people who trusted in his promises, who believed his word, who waited for his salvation, their forgiveness was based not upon law keeping of their own, but on the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, which was yet to come. Old Testament believers would only be forgiven, would only be found in heaven because of the sacrifice of the promised one. The cross of Jesus Christ, if you would just picture the shape of the cross in your mind's eye, the cross, it points backwards. And as it points backward, it pays for the former sins of the believing people of God. But the cross is also planted firmly in the present, and it covers present sin. And at the same time, it points forward, and it covers sins yet to be forgiven. See, the Old Testament people of God, living under the law but trusting in the promises of God, they were recipients of grace. But here is the thing, they didn't see and they didn't know how. They trusted in the promises. They were in a place of waiting, but it was anticipatory. They didn't see the full picture. They didn't see the ultimate solution to the problem of sin. They had the law, which highlighted the problem of sin and the holiness of God, but they didn't see the outworking of the solution. They didn't have that experience of the grace of God in Jesus Christ.
You're listening to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths and a message entitled An Incredible Privilege. It is part of our series Faith Under Fire, and while we're going to pause right here for just a moment, we'll get back to the message, so I hope you'll stay with us. Have you ever wondered what proof there is that Jesus of Nazareth really lived and that he really is the Son of God? Lee Strobel wondered about that. He was a former legal editor of the Chicago Tribune and the New York Times. He was a best-selling author as well. And in his book, The Case for Christ, he really retraces his own spiritual journey from atheism to faith and builds this captivating case for Christ's divinity. We'd love to send you a copy of this book as our way of saying thank you for supporting Encounter the Truth this month. You can find out more or give online at encounterthetruth.org or call us at 1-833-99-TRUTH. That's 1-833-998-7884. Or again, the website is encounterthetruth.org. Back to the message. Here is Jonathan.
It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, to live on the other side, on the far side of the solution to a great problem. You can think of any number of breakthroughs in history and technology and medicine and other realms. Think of the discovery of electricity or of penicillin. The solution to the need, to the problem, when it comes, it changes the world. One of the great breakthroughs of the modern era in large cities is the development of mass transit systems. Some of them work a little better than others, of course. I was learning recently about the history of this in the city of Boston. Boston had the first subway in America, you may know, opening its first line in 1897. Now, leading up to this time, the city was suffering terrible gridlock, with carriages just clogging the main roads and turning the main roads of downtown Boston into parking lots, with people actually regularly being injured and killed by falling under carriages and trams. Various approaches were taken to address the problem, but a few visionaries really believed in electric locomotives and saw that the only way ultimately was underground. Skepticism was huge, opposition was rife, but then the subway opened. And on the first day, 100,000 people rode the new line, and the city was at once transformed, and America never looked back. As in so many transformative developments, breakthroughs, there is a decisive intervention that changes everything. But you can't see it. You don't know the solution until it has come. And then once it has come, there's no looking back. The people of Israel, the Old Testament people of God, knew that they had a deep problem with sin. The law highlighted that problem daily for them, and their conscience, of course, confirmed it all the time. They understood that God had promised a solution and would provide for them, but they didn't have the full picture. They didn't see the outworking of these things. They lived in the era of anticipation, but not the era of transformative reality. You see, for grace to be revealed, Jesus Christ had to come. That's what Peter emphasizes. For the Old Testament prophets, this was a promise and an expectation, but it was not yet. The prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours, says Peter, searched and inquired carefully, inquiring what person or time the Spirit of Christ in them was indicating when he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the subsequent glories. The basic fact, known to most of us so well, is that our sin, our wrongdoing, our law-breaking, it is the great barrier between us and God. It is the great problem at the very core of our lives. It is the crisis that hangs over our death and over our eternity. We have done that which is wrong. We have offended the God who made us. We have earned his judgment. We are deserving of hell. And the debt of sin, it is simply more than you and I can pay. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you've received a bill which you are simply unable to pay. You know, the bank balance is near zero. The savings account is empty. There's nowhere else to go. I guess some among us, some listening, will have faced bankruptcy actually square in the face at some point in time. It's an awful thing. Whatever you do, whatever you sell, whatever you liquidate, whatever arrangement you can make with the bank, you cannot pay, and you are now out of options. The Bible tells us that in spiritual terms, you and I, we were bankrupt, helpless, and hopeless. Throughout the Old Testament, God indicated that there were grounds for hope. He gave promises and symbols of that hope, not least through the sacrifices given at the temple. These illustrated the key principle that God would accept the death of a substitute, the death of another, to pay the price of sin. But until Jesus came, and until Jesus lived, and until Jesus died, and on the cross paid the price of our sin, and then rose again in glory, confirming the effectiveness of that sacrifice, until his sufferings and subsequent glories, as Peter puts it in verse 11, you and I, we couldn't see and we couldn't experience grace. In that sense, God's grace was stored up for our generation. It was promised, it was prepared, but the grace of God, it actually came to us in Jesus Christ. And now in our age, in our generation, in the church's age, we have seen it because we have seen him. And so for us, grace, it's not just a promise. Forgiveness, it's not just a hope. Acceptance before the Father, cleansing, healing, wholeness of heart, these things are a reality in Jesus Christ who came. You and I, we have the privilege of looking back in space and time and history, and we see the Son of God dying in our place upon a cross, dying for our sin, taking the wrath that is our due, purchasing our forgiveness before the Father. And if we belong to him by faith, these things are now our possession. We have them. We know them experientially, and they are ours by faith. Now, grace is the foundational theme of the Christian life. It's where we begin, and it is the great soothing and majestic theme that runs throughout the Christian life as well. This grace that was to be ours, it is our everything. And as we think together about grace afresh today, it's my hope and it's my prayer that it is something that you know personally, something that you are experiencing today, something that you are living in the good of even now. There is a very real possibility, of course, that you are someone who may be only familiar with religion, but you've never actually experienced grace. And if that's you, and it may be, I want to take a moment to consider together the wonder of grace and the difference between true Christian grace and what you might think of as religion. It may be that no one has actually taken time to clarify that for you, and it is so very important to know the difference. There is a kind of default mode within the human heart that assumes that in order for things to be right between me and God and for me to be acceptable to God, I need to do a number of things. We need to attain a certain standard. We need to keep a list of rules. We need to maintain certain religious observances. Now, I think that instinct, which is a universal instinct in the human heart, I think that in a way it flows from an awareness that we all have, given to us in our creation as people made by God in his image, an awareness that, yes, there is a God who made us and who will one day judge us and who has set a standard of right and wrong within his world. And our God-given conscience, we all have one, it tells us each day that we have failed to meet his standards, that we continue to do so. Now, these are God-given instincts. To some extent, all human beings have an awareness of these things, even if they might deny them, on some level at least. And having this basic sense of the existence of God, of our own accountability to him, of our personal guilt, we just assume that in order for everything to be okay in the end, we need to do more and we've got to try harder. And various versions of human religion, including skewed versions of Christianity, step into that gap and provide a series of ready-made rules and regulations, rites and rituals which promise to bring you to God if you will but do them. Now, the Bible is crystal clear that we as human people, fallen in sin, can never actually do enough to wipe away that sin and to make ourselves acceptable to the God of heaven. It's a hopeless exercise. His standard is perfection. We will never meet it. And his penalty for sin, it is death. There's no way that any of us can pay that penalty except through dying ourselves. And so the whole exercise is ultimately hopeless. The promise of rules-based religion is always empty. In fact, it is a kind of slavery. Do more, but never gain freedom. That's the empty promise of religion, of rule, of rite, of ritual. Now, in utter contrast to that, the message of Jesus Christ, true gospel Christianity, it is grounded in grace. And grace is utterly unlike what I have just described. See, grace, it recognizes the problem of sin, the moral failure of humanity, the holy standard of God, the reality of accountability and of judgment. Grace takes all of that into account, but in the wisdom and kindness of God, it finds a way through. You see, in grace, Jesus Christ came into this world and kept perfectly the holy standards of God. He never sinned, he never slipped up, he never failed. And with his perfect record perfectly intact, he went to the place of judgment for us as our substitute. He died the death that we deserve, bearing the punishment for our sin, and at the cross, a great exchange took place. Jesus took on my sin and yours, and he gave to us his perfect record of righteousness, of holiness, of obedience. And so now forgiveness from sin, freedom from guilt, the hope of heaven, these are given to us as gifts of grace as we trust in him. It's grace, full, free, unbound, unlimited grace for all who believe. We don't earn it, we never could. We don't pay for it, we would never have the resources. We don't work for it because the work has already been done. It is a gift given simply because of the kindness of the giver.
Maybe you have never received that gift, but as you're listening to Jonathan's teaching today, you've come to the point where you realize you'd like to, but you've got some questions about that. I hope you'll contact us here at Encounter the Truth. Talk to one of our staff members. Our toll-free number is 1-833-99-TRUTH. That's 1-833-998-7884. And if you want to go back and listen to this broadcast again, you can do that by visiting our website. Just come to encounterthetruth.org. You know, being a listener-supported ministry, we depend on your generosity to keep Jonathan's teaching on the station. And as you give a gift of any amount this month, we want to say thank you by sending you a book called The Case for Christ. And if you're a regular listener, you know that we want to equip you with resources that will benefit you, that you can use in your walk with Christ. So, Jonathan, who would this book be beneficial for?
Well, I think this is a book that will be useful really to any kind of listener to the program today, and that's one of the reasons we selected it. It'll be useful to you if you're exploring the Christian faith. Maybe you just happened upon the program today as you were flicking through the dial on the radio, and you started listening, and maybe some questions are now springing to mind about the Christian message and the Christian faith. This book is an articulately argued case for Jesus being who he says he is in the Bible. And I think you're going to find it fascinating. I think you'll find it engaging. I think you'll find it hard to put down. So if you're exploring the faith, this book is for you. If you are a believer who wants to grow in your ability to engage in conversations about Christ with others who don't yet trust him and don't yet follow him, this book is going to be great for equipping and resourcing you for those key conversations. And if you're someone as a believer who's praying for friends and loved ones and you're thinking, what could I do to be a help to them as they consider the faith, or to help them even begin to consider the faith, this is a great book to get hold of and to prayerfully give away.
Well, we'd love to send you a copy of this book. The Case for Christ is our thank you for your financial support this month. You can give your gift online at encounterthetruth.org or over the phone. Our number is 833-998-7884. It might be easier to remember as 833-99-TRUTH. Or again, the website, encounterthetruth.org. For producer Mark Brunna and our Bible teacher Jonathan Griffiths, I'm Steve Hiller. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time.